World War I and the Men That Served, Byron Bay, by Evan Armstrong. Byron Bay is a small coastal town in northern New South Wales. Prior to World War I, it had a population of around 1,500, and the economy of the town was mainly focused on whaling, dairy, farming and logging. Its main points of interest were the docks used to export goods produced locally and the lighthouse built to support the docks. Electricity was not even introduced in Byron Bay until around 1926. The data came from the honour roll that consisted of the towns Byron Bay, Bangalore and Mullumbimby. I focused on the town of Byron Bay, of which there were 96 names in total, 8 of which had incomplete data. The enlistee profile showed that Byron Bay was a rural community, with the vast majority of enlistees being involved in blue-collar labour, particularly in areas such as farming, dairy or labouring. There was even a lighthouse keeper. The small percentage of white-collar workers were mainly clerks or other office and support personnel. All enlistees from Byron Bay were Christian. The majority came from the Church of England denomination, which comprised of 58%. Presbyterians comprised 26%, and Roman Catholics comprised 10%. All other Christian denominations comprised a total of 5%. Australia was different from the other combatants during the First World War in that it never enacted conscription, instead relying entirely on volunteers. The article included is a demonstration of a recruiting event held in 1916. The vast majority of soldiers joined in 1915 and 16, and their ages varied greatly, from as young as 18 to as old as 45, with an average age of around 25. In fact, 2/3 of those who served were under the age of 25. While the Anzac myth would have you believe the vast majority of units enlisted were of the light horse, nothing could be further from the truth. 84% of soldiers enlisted to fight in World War I enlisted in the infantry, while only 6% enlisted in the light horse. Those troops who manned the machine guns comprised 4%, while the other category of 6% consisted of logistics, artillery, engineer, and aircraft maintenance units. The vast majority of the enlistees from Byron Bay enlisted as and stayed privates throughout the war. Only 3 people had prior military or leadership experiences, and these became corporals and sergeants. By the end of the war, the rank profile had not changed particularly much, although 2 NCOs were commissioned as officers, in particular as lieutenants. Of the 96 people who enlisted, 18 would die during the Great War. Of these, the vast majority were killed in action or died of their wounds. Only 3 died in 1915 during the Gallipoli campaign, as the vast majority of enlistees joined later in the war during 1916 and 17 and 18. The majority of the dead occurred on the Western Front in France and Belgium. 4 of the 18 died of disease or infection from their wounds. In fact, 1 died in 1919 after the war had ended from infection. There was only one POW from Byron Bay, Francis Stocks. He was wounded in the chest and lungs on the Western Front and was then captured by the German forces. He was then held at camp number Z3605 at Salto, which is at Hanover in Germany. 25 enlistees left the army before the war had finished. There were a number of differing lengths of service, with the shortest being just 129 days and the longest being 1,463 days, while the average person served for 811 days. The vast majority of people who left the armed forces early did so during the latter part of the war in 1917 and 18. Of the 96 people who enlisted from Byron Bay during World War I, 18 died. A further 8 records are incomplete and their fates are unknown. But after the war's conclusion, the vast majority returned home to Australia and were demobilised during 1919. A small percentage are listed as overseas and had not returned to Australia by the time their records were concluded. This includes a proportion of people who were still recovering in hospitals in Europe, or had decided to remain in Europe after the war's conclusion. During the year of 1919, the soldiers of Byron Bay were steadily demobilised. The soldiers were assigned a demobilisation score depending on how long they served and if they were married. As only 10% were married, very few received these extra points. The vast majority received their points based on the time they had served in uniform. In May, when the largest group of soldiers was demobilised, a large celebration was held by the local Girls' League. Thank you for watching my presentation about World War I and Byron Bay. I hope you enjoyed it and found it informative.